And this is the news.
All right, dude, I'm going to try to do this in one shot. Hello, I'm joined today by Mr. Evan Screamer Hewett.
First top of the list, Evan Screamer Hewett.
He earned that name because of his boisterous attitude? I don't know.
I don't need a microphone.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So you were Navy since...
August of 2009 was when I...
Oh, August?
Yeah, I went through boot camp.
Okay, so I got out in August of 2009.
Nice.
So we literally high-fived. Yeah, all right. You had the watch.
You had it, I got it.
Yeah, all right. And we both ended up at flight school. So the purpose of this interview is to kind of just talk about somebody coming in from another branch, active duty, to the Army flight program. And we're going to talk about your experience. So, and then we'll talk at the end, we'll talk about actually flight school and the first 6 months of being here. And we just finished up our first phase last week. So we're kind of just waiting to go to our advanced aircraft. We go to that selection ceremony here in a couple weeks. So looking forward to that, and got some spare time to knock this out and hopefully give some more value to folks that are wanting to do something like this. So take it away, man. Talk about kind of your history in the Navy and how you got here.
All right.
And
well,
I can hold that for you so you can just chill and talk.
I don't know what to do with my hands.
Yeah.
So like you said, I originally enlisted in the Navy for the nuclear power program, and I did that for 6 years. I was on fast attack submarines out of Pearl Harbor, and then left active duty, was out of service in just the inactive reserve for about 3 months. I had just gotten married and talked to a recruiter. Long story short, I ended up re-rating. You're not allowed to be a nuclear qualified person in the reserves for just various reasons. So they said, well, you can't be a nuke ET anymore. What do you want to do instead? And I ended up settling on gunner's mate, which is a guns and weapons expert. Ended up hooking up with I drilled out of Houston, and then I finally got my hard orders to a unit. I was with the Riverboat Squadron out of Orange County, Mezeron 11, and
Orange County, California.
Nice. And so Seal Beach, and deployed with them to Africa. Was part of weapons department. Rating to gunner's mate was very fortunate for this because there's no way they would have let me leave the Navy as a nuke, period, regardless of what I wanted to do, unless it was to commission as a nuclear officer. That's basically your only other option.
So, and that's because the training to become a nuke is so intense, right? And so lengthy, and they invest a lot in you, or?
It's kind of a byproduct of that because the training is what it is. There aren't a lot of nukes, and the ones that are there don't stay in very long because the lifestyle is pretty rough. So they have a really awful attrition rate on top of a job that doesn't let everyone in anyway. You have to meet a certain academic minimum, and that's actually a pretty high bar to clear. I think statistically it is academically the most difficult program in the entire armed forces.
Okay, so to be a nuke in the Navy is pretty tough. What would you, just for anybody who might watch this that's thinking about going subs in the Navy, has that aspiration, what would you tell them about that career field, and just like a quick piece of advice to them since you're here?
Yeah, well, credit where credit's due. As far as setting you up for like opportunities, it has a screaming advancement rate. So if you want to advance through the enlisted rates in the Navy, you'll get there quick. I was an E6 at 4 years.
Okay.
Four or 5 years in the Navy. So yeah, you promote very quickly.
Yeah, I rode a ship. I mean, I know that getting to petty officer first class it's first class.
First class.
Yeah, you don't get there in 4 years for most rates.
Yeah, it was about as quick of an advancement as you could ever hope for. And it teaches you what the difficulty is at least for my job, they basically give you the equivalent of a nuclear engineering technology degree, which is a 4-year degree, in the period of 18 months. So they cut off some of the stuff that you don't need, like
Greek mythology.
Yeah, like Greek mythology, like your gen eds, your psychology classes, your writing classes, all that stuff. They really cut it down to the physics and math and science and chemistry parts.
And like being underway and all that stuff, you guys do some cool stuff? Or
the Los Angeles class submarine came about around toward the end of the Cold War, and it was a hunter-killer submarine. Mm-hmm. It's designed to counter-detect other submarines and destroy them if it needs to. But because no one wants to shoot at us, now they're like, well, now we got to figure out something to do with them. We listen. We listen, and we monitor a lot of stuff. Okay. And so we just kind of try to build this bed of intelligence.
I find that stuff incredibly interesting. It's a whole other, it's quite literally the opposite of what we're doing here, I guess. Yeah.
High visibility versus low visibility, really.
That's cool that you came from that. And so what kind of drove you towards aviation? What did you always want to fly? Was it something that you ran into in your travels in the Navy? Mm-hmm. Like, how'd you get down the path a little bit?
Well, I hit a point in the Navy where I realized that the thing that was really holding me back was the fact I didn't have a 4-year degree. And so because the Navy has warrant officers, but when presented with decades ago, when presented with the opportunity of warrant officer or limited duty officer, the Navy decided to emphasize limited duty officer, right, to augment its officer corps, whereas the Army went warrant officer to augment its officer corps. And the big difference is one requires a 4-year degree, one doesn't, right? And so I was in the process of getting my mechanical engineering degree because I wanted to drop an engineering officer packet through the reserves and actually go O-grade officer through the Navy. And that's, 4-year degree. Guess how long it takes? About 4 years, right? Yeah. So I didn't have the ability to go full-time student because I had a family and, I had a full-time job. So I was just kind of one chunk at a time whittling away at this degree. So I went into a career counselor as a reservist on active duty orders for my deployment to Djibouti. And I said, what do you have for active duty gunner's mates? And he didn't even look. He was like, nothing. I said, he types away on his keyboard, flips his monitor, and it's this Excel spreadsheet that is just completely empty. And he's like, this is every opportunity for every rate, rank, community, mission across the entire Navy reserves.
He just pulled up Excel.
Oh, this guy again. Hang on. Yeah. And
he just opened it.
Yeah. And so, so he showed me, he's like, it's not just you, it's absolutely everyone because of the situation. A key point here is that this was a career counselor for the entire base, not just the Navy. He was the guy for everyone. And every branch of service has a presence out in Djibouti. So he needed to know all the opportunities for everyone across all the branches. And he knew that the Army aviators, there was no feeder MOS for warrant officers, meaning it doesn't matter what you do, you can apply for it, period. And so he's like, well, are you willing to try another branch of service? I was like, I'd been in the Navy coming up on 12 years at that point. I said, I'm in an E6. I knew how to do my job. I was pretty established. I'm like, I'm not saying yes, I'm not saying no, but I'm not starting over as E2 grunt somewhere. Like if it's worth my time, yeah. And he goes, do you want to fly helicopters? I said, yes. I was like, what are you talking about? And he pitched the aviation program to me, and he gave me the Go Warrant website for the Army to do my own research. I'm plugging away, I'm doing research into it. I was like, holy crap. And so that was where it was kind of fortuitous, where I went from active duty into the reserves, and I had to trade away from the nuclear rate, right? Because if I was still a nuke, there's no way on earth they would allow me to separate from the Navy. They're like, no, we're going to keep you here until your contract expires. Yeah. And then I still would have been able to apply for the aviation program, but I think at that point it would have had to have been from a street to sea. That makes sense.
Yeah, sure.
And anyway, started building my packet out in Djibouti for the admin-wise, getting my letters of recommendation knocked out. There were some things Djibouti couldn't do, like they didn't have the ability to do the flight physical as the Army required it. They could proctor the SIF test out there, but they were having computer issues, and it just never worked. there was like a couple of other things I needed to knock out. Like I actually had to sit down with a recruiter at some point and hammer this stuff out, because now they were the Fort Hood recruiter office, or excuse me, Fort Cavazos recruiter office was very responsive to emails. Like they were really good about getting back to me if I had questions and elaborating on things. So they made the process really easy. But there was still, footwork I had to do on my end. And the way I had it done was, once I figured out exactly the things I still needed to do, once I got back stateside, I lived in Houston, and Fort Cavazos is about a 2.5 hour drive. The thing I needed was the DD Form 368, which is the inter-service transfer form. And that is because, as an enlisted person, it is a contract that you are obligated to, right? It is a legal document. And the DD Form 368 is basically the other legal document that both parties agree to, that we are willing to let you go out of this contract under the condition you commission as an Army Warrant Officer, basically, is what it said.
Who signed that off from the Navy side?
So that's
how did that conversation go for you?
Yeah, that wasn't hard. That was all handled basically through the career counselor's office, like the paper pushers, for lack of a better word, for the Navy, where there was like header information I had to fill out, who I was, what my rate was, when my contract or when my enlistment expired, like basic information. And then like the next sections, like one of them was filled out by the recruiter that I was working with to transfer. He put in his information. And then the Navy office put in their information saying, this guy is wanting to transfer out. This is the code, and the code corresponded with, commission, like seeking commission. And so, yeah, it was a little bit of a runaround. The big thing was I had to stay on top of the office to keep me in the communication loop. Like all these emails that you send off to people, you need to CC me on these emails so I can see what point in the process, because that's kind of an issue with the reserves, is things have a tendency to stall out if you don't stay on top of them.
Yeah, sure.
Like where's this paper I sent it a month ago to get signed? Where, oh, whoops, that's been in my inbox, or that was so-and-so was supposed to sign that, blah, blah, blah. That's just basic military that you got to stay on top of.
It is basic military, but for anybody who's kind of new, that's that whole nobody's going to care about your career as much as you do. So it's a hard lesson to learn early in your career. If you got gray hair like me, or you've been around like Hewett here, you're well aware of it, and you just kind of naturally do it. But for new people, take a little time, be tactful, but stay on top of things.
Yep.
So you got those signatures. Sounds like your command was willing to help you and didn't really see a lot of issue with it. How'd you get letters of recommendation, and who'd you get them from?
Well, so that was, if you do your research into the commissioning process, there are 3 required letters of recommendation that you have to get. Certainly as a service member, you have to get a field grade officer, a company grade officer, and a senior warrant officer in the community to which you're applying. So for us, that would have been an aviation, a pilot, right? Senior warrant.
I know this is annoying, so forgive me to cut you off, but just the way you describe that speaks to me of how well you did your own research.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. So and don't be afraid to ask questions, right? Like I know Fort Hood, they were doing Cavazos. Come on, man. Fort Cavazos, they did a weekly webinar, like a Teams meeting, where if you're an applicant, they're like, okay, this week we're doing these 3 forms. We're going to show you exactly the information you need to put in these. Yeah, they are as involved as they can be in helping you get this done without actually doing it for you.
Wow.
So they were very helpful. But the letters of recommendation I got were interesting because I was a Navy guy, I didn't know any Army warrant officers, right? Okay, but it's a joint base, and I knew that there were Army warrant officers in Djibouti.
Which is where you were at the time.
Which is where I was at the time, right, when I was working on the packet. And so I just went up to one of them. I'm like, hey, I'm putting in a packet for aviation for Army, and I need a warrant officer endorsed, letter of recommendation. Are there any pilots here that I could sit down and talk to? And most of them were air traffic controllers is the problem. And there actually weren't any aviation warrant officers in Djibouti, which was interesting because it's the biggest warrant officer aviation community is in the Army is the pilots, but none of them were out there. So, but so that kind of started this process of, I brought it up to Fort Hood that I there aren't any of these warrant officers out here. Can you give me a phone number for someone? And they gave me a phone number. I called them. They say, yeah, I see what you're trying to do, but you got the wrong office. You want to email this person. Okay, I emailed that person. You're kind of bouncing around to offices. I wind up contacting Grafenvar, Germany, of all places. Chief Buzzard, shout out. Got his phone number, called his desk phone. He answered his desk phone on like a Tuesday morning. And he's like, hello. And I'm like, hello, is this Chief Buzzard? He's like, it is. And I was like, you know, I'm Petty Officer Hewett. I'm stationed in Camp Lemonnier in Djibouti. I'm working on an Army aviation packet to become a pilot myself. I wanted to talk to you about the lifestyle, what that was like, and potentially get a letter of recommendation from you if possible. And he was like, okay, how did you get this number? And so you know, I kind of went through my process, and he was just like, man, I'll give you an interview just because I'm impressed by the tenacity, you know, like I'm impressed. And so that was that one. I got a letter of recommendation from a Chief Warrant 5, which was awesome. My field grade and my company grade officers was my the weapons officer, who was in Coast Guard 04 out there with us in Camp Lemonnier. And I went to long story short, I went to Article 15 over it. Like it was a big enough deal where I was in my dress uniform in front of the commanding officer.
I have one of those too.
I have one too. Okay. And so take that if you're considering putting a packet together, but you have a discipline related thing in your record. If there's a will, there's a waiver, man. Like, because you have a waiver in your packet doesn't mean your packet's dead in the water, right?
Yeah, we've talked about this before, but like probably 70% of the packets have waivers. You got to get them for speeding tickets, random nonsense, medical stuff, age. They're all over the place. So just do it, no big deal.
Yeah, I mean, the best thing you can do is put your best packet out and send it off. And the worst thing they can say is, hey, I don't think this is for you right now, right? Yeah. Like, they try again here in a little bit. Yep. That helped me out even more in the long run, because they're like, he could handle everything we threw at him, right? He figured it out. And so when it came time to ask my 04 weapons department officer and then our mission commander for a letter of recommendation, who was an 05, easy day. Those were my 3 required letters of recommendation. The other thing is they say, hey, if you can get more letters of recommendation, go for it, so long as they're substantive. As long as they have substance to them. They're not just, they're extra, they don't want extra fluff in the packet. And so from that point, I got 3 other letters of recommendation. I got one from my old commanding officer, who was currently in 06 at the time of the packet. And I reached out to him and I said, hey, I don't know if you remember me or not, but, you know, I served as on reactor control division under you for this, from this time to this time. And I even included, I was able to get old evals that he had signed. I'm like, here's the evals that you signed for me, just to remind you. I'm like, here are key things that we did while we were on board. Just kind of reminded him of who I was and what I did for him. And he had no problem writing me a letter of recommendation, because that actually looks good on them. And this is another thing that earlier in my career, I kept saying no to myself for putting in a commission program, because I knew you had to get a letter from an officer. And I'm like, oh, he's busy. You know, he doesn't have time for me, or, you know, like, he doesn't know who I am. That works out for them, because they can say, under my command, we commissioned this many people, right? Like, under my leadership, I was able to tutor and develop these sailors to an officer level, right? So don't ever think it's an inconvenience for them to write you a letter. They like it too, because they can make it work for them.
Yeah, so it sounds to me like the big takeaway is, don't be afraid to make the phone calls, don't be afraid to make the emails, put yourself out there, be professional, have your little spiel ready. You mentioned, hey, I want to learn about the branch and the lifestyle, and I was hoping to get an interview. Like, that's the little spiel right there. Boom. I mean,
really just understand that they don't owe you this letter, right? You want to get it from them, but be very clear about your intentions. Say I'm doing this for this reason.
I've said it before, but, like, you know, on the guard side, I was so invested in this, I would have called all 50 states if, you know, because I ran into multiple states that said, no, we're not doing age waivers right now. I just kept calling on the phone. So if that's not you, or you needed to hear that, you know, please go and make the calls and
Yeah.
don't be afraid to put yourself out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you did your packet, you got accepted, and then I think we could transition to flight school right after I use the head again.
Yeah.
Or the latrine, if we're going to be correct for our branch of service. Yeah, close it out.
Yeah, and so, okay, so just to kind of close out the loop on the letters of recommendation. So I had my old commanding officer write me a letter of recommendation, shout out Wes Brigham. And then my old XO had gotten promoted in that time, because you got to understand, it had been 7 years since I was on the submarine, and these two, their career had continued to progress, right? So my old XO was now a commanding officer himself. He was the CO of the Seawolf at the time.
Oh.
And same deal, reached out to him. Would you be willing to write me a letter? Absolutely. And send him the eval, send him a quick write-up. This is what I did. He turned out a letter of recommendation. It was excellent. And then the third and final extra letter of recommendation that I got was from my mom's cousin's son. So was it my second cousin or my cousin once removed or something? I don't do the genealogy stuff very well.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. Anyway, he wrote me a letter of recommendation because he's a Navy F-18 pilot.
Okay.
And so he had been on aircraft carriers earlier in his career and just throughout his career. And that's important because the only two platforms you can do the nuke job for the Navy on are submarines and carriers. So he had interacted with nuclear guys earlier in his career. He knew what we did. He knew what we were trained on. He knew what we were good at. And so his letter of recommendation was, this is what he knows, and as a pilot, this is how that translates to aviation.
Right.
And so it was kind of like this really good bring it all together sort of.
Make it relatable.
Yeah, make it relatable.
Audience. Yeah.
And so that was a really good letter. I had my 6 letters of recommendation, and then I had all the other stuff. Went back to Fort Cavazos, took the SIFT, got my aviation physical completed, and
Do you remember what you got on the SIFT?
I got a 74.
Okay, so that's a really good score. I got a 62 or 3 or something.
Yeah.
So people just want to know sometimes. I've heard of people who have literally failed it, taken it again, who are pilots. People have gotten 50s or whatever. Like,
Yeah,
you kind of just need to pass it. If you can do really well like him, do that.
Well, a lot of that was because of the nuclear training, like math and physics and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
They taught me all of that in nuke school, and it's just one of those things that if you know math and physics, you know how the world works.
Nice.
So
Nice.
that's about the end of the Navy part of it. Then
Okay.
I ship off to boot camp. So
All right. So, Evan, Screamer, thanks for your time, man. It's always a pleasure hanging out with you. If you would like to leave a comment, I say this in all my videos, actually do that if you have something valuable to provide, or if you're one of the guys who've come through here and it meant something to you, write about your experience down there. It actually, when people are coming here looking for information, seeing you guys comment below actually does a ton of good. It adds more perspective than just our perspective, and it kind of allows people to have like a therapeutic shared experience.
yeah,
So do that. Like the video if you don't mind. It helps get the word out. Fly Army, sharp minds, smooth hands, and see you on the next one. Thanks.
have a good one.